A lock-off is a way of stopping a suspension line from moving. Simple as that. I've noticed as a trend, particularly at like big rope conferences, the number of accidents on the first day at a new location will jump up. A large part of that is because people are taught how to do a lock-off, but not necessarily how a lock-off works. For me, how a lock-off works is absolute gold mine, because it means that you can adapt your lock-off to difficult situations. Like if you're rigging in a strange building with odd beams and things like that, you can still adapt it to a different circumstance. I'm hoping that's how it'll be useful for people. This video is for people who already suspend but want to just deepen their knowledge a little bit, and it is also think it will be useful for people who get suspended, because you can look at someone's lock off and just evaluate like what the logical principles that they're using there. Does it seem like it makes sense? This video is not for people who already do rope as a way of transitioning them into doing suspension. If you want to check out the video, you find it interesting, awesome, but it's not a way of, even if you know a really good harness and you're happy with how you tie your harness, this is not a way of going from not suspending to suspending. There's a lot of information missing. So, for example, what happens if you have more than one line? The appropriate equipment to use, how you keep the harness that is tied on the person sustainable. If you attach to it in the wrong way, you can either rip it off the body or you can deform it to the point where it's agonising for the person in it. What is the exit strategy out of the suspension? How do you come out of it under normal circumstances? How do you come out of it if it's an emergency, so like someone faints? About how to manage pain and the discomfort of going into a suspension. That's just a few things. Okay, so for this, I'm suspending my futon, which is pretty light. I can lift it with one hand, so any mistakes I make are pretty easily forgiven. Let's have a look at how suspension lines work on carabiners and metal rings. We go up to the hard point, back down to the thing we're suspending. Back up to the hard point again. And if any lifting is occurring, this is where it's going to happen, so there's more leverage. Okay, so at this point, there are two ways that we can stop this from coming down. Way number one is we can hold on to this line. I don't just want to stand here and hold the line, so I'm going to tie something in place that's going to hold the line for me. In this case, we're going to put a hitch in. For safety, there's going to be a couple of those. And you see this quite a lot, and it kind of works. Problem is it can destabilize really easily if any kind of force goes up from the bottom. And you see how now the hitches have all been pushed to the top, and it's going to be very difficult to unpick. And it's going to be especially difficult if you've got a whole person's body weight on there. So what's the second way of keeping the suspension line up? Well, I could grip all of these lines together, squeeze them, if you will. Now, this works a lot better than you might think, because the texture of rope is slightly coarse, which means that if you've got several lines parallel to each other that are all being squeezed together, that does a fantastic job of holding them in place. Obviously, I don't just want to stand there and hold it, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the rope on a path that is going to squeeze the rope together for us. So in this case, I'm going all the way around and then changing direction by going behind. And I'm going to give a little pull down, and you see now that is all nicely contained together. Now, you can see that this is so strong that I can hold up the futon with just my little finger. It's not a heavy futon, admittedly, but you can hold a surprising amount of weight with that kind of lock off at the top. The only problem is I need something in place to stop it from coming back. So now I'm going to put a hitch on and move that hitch up to the top so that it can't go anywhere. Because the lock-on is there beforehand, it is going to stop the potential of the hitch slipping and locking down on itself. What you can see is a very common technique that's taught in a lot of rope classes. Before we move on, let's just have a look at it one more time from a different angle. This is a technique that I teach to new students who are starting out in suspension. It's not uncommon when people travel that they'll take a wooden suspension ring rather than a metal suspension ring. You'll notice side by side that the wooden suspension ring has a considerably larger diameter. So does this affect our way of locking off, and why? So here I'm following the same procedure as before. By the way, there's many other reasons why I don't like wooden rings, but this is one of them. We can do the same lock off, but notice that because of the diameter, the rope is further apart to start with than it was with the metal ring. So it's a lot harder for this lock off to make the rope squeeze together, which is what is making the lock off work effectively. And you'll notice that now when I let go of it, it starts to come apart a lot more keenly than it was before. I need to work a lot harder to squeeze it together, which means that it's going to behave differently when I undo it. Let's take a more extreme example. Notice how thick the bamboo is compared to either of the rings that I used previously. Let's see what happens when we try the same thing. You'll notice that the gap is so big that not only is the rope not touching, but I can get my whole hand in between. So if I were to try this lock off at the top, this rope is now having to work very hard to hold it together. And even with doing that, there's still a big enough gap for me to fit my finger through. That is creating very little friction in this case. And it's very hard for it to be held together. We've established that our original technique isn't going to work that well on bamboo. So how are we going to adapt? Well, I still want to squeeze the lines together because I still think that's the best way of keeping it up. So instead we're going to not try and do that at the top where it's really difficult to squeeze the lines together because the pressure of the bamboo is pushing it apart. Instead we're going to come down and do it where it's much easier to squeeze them. And I'm going to wrap around, go around twice to force those all together. And then I'm going to go through the center and pull down. I'll lock it all together. This is pretty strong, it works really well. Now to do something with this end, I'm going to put a hitch on to finish. Putting my hand in between the two pieces of rope, pulling towards me, and rather than do a full hitch, I'm just going to pull a loop through, because that's going to be a lot easier to get in and out. And once I pull a loop through, I'm putting a twisty knot over the top and pulling down to lock it in place. This will mean that I can easily disengage the main line when I need to. Because of the power of the squeeze, we've got a very strong lock off here that isn't coming apart no matter how hard I try and make it. So to make it come apart, it can be difficult because it's going to move around quite a lot. So to stabilise it, I put my finger on the inside and then disengage this hitch, and then I can unpick it one piece at a time and have a very controlled exit from the suspension. Okay, one more time from a different angle. Hey friends, I hope that was useful. Thank you as ever to my patrons for making this video possible. If you're interested in going a bit deeper or supporting this channel, I'll leave a link in the description or it will come on screen now.